Long years ago, we made a trip with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge.
8 नवंबर 2016 की रात्रि को 12 बजे से
चीफ मिनिस्टर के लिए मेरा एक ही संदेश है कि वो राजधर्म का पालन करें।
हार्डवेयर वालों की सोच क्या होती है, हार्ड वर्क वालों की सोच क्या होती है।
अरे ये ना पंजाब की खुशबू।
So where is India's Zohran Mamdani is something that a lot of folks on social media are asking. And by folks, I mean a very specific group, probably a group that I am the most familiar with over the last few years. The people who are left of center talk about justice and equity in the context of India. When I look at this question, it is a legitimate question, but I don't think of Zohran Mamdani as a leftist socialist leader because that exists in India. There is a communist party, there is a socialist party, Samajwadi party, and it gets elected. So what exactly does Zohran Mamdani represent in that context? Look at a city like New York. Without getting into the demographic details, if you think of New York, you still think of it as a multicultural, predominantly white city. If you think of someone like Zohran Mamdani, he comes from a very small group of South Asian folks living in New York. Now, compared to the rest of the US, there are definitely more South Asian people living in New York, but it is, I don't know, I would still think it is less than 2%. And the thing is that to think of that aspect of his identity and then imagining him to be elected as the mayor of this city is astounding. For people, for New York to go out and vote for this guy means to vote out of their identity, in most cases, in 98% cases, to go out of their identity bracket and vote for someone like that guy. Because, as I said, in 98% cases, he will not be the representative of how they look, the religion they follow, their ethnicity, other practices, and yet they go out and do it. And when I talk about India, I'd love to share this statistic. It's a sad statistic, but I ask the same group, my friends, people that I know, about percentage of intercaste marriages in India. And by intercaste, I do not mean a Dalit Brahmin wedding. I mean any intercaste. It could be a Brahmin, Kshatriya, caste, Vaishya, whatever, right? All of any of those groups intermarrying. And the data that I have for me, last data is from 2015, 10 years ago. 5% of all of the weddings that happened in 2015 were intercaste. And in my home state of MP, that was 1%. So 99% people forget marrying to someone from the oppressed caste community. They did not even marry someone outside of their dominant caste. That is where India is. That is how siloed we are as people, because around us we see those kind of alliances happen all the time. So in that context, asking this question, where is India's Zohran Mamdani, is a fair question. Another data point that is interesting in this aspect is, according to a Pew survey from 2020, 82% Indians identify their religion as their primary form of identity. This is not Hindus or Muslims or Christians or Sikhs. This is across the board. So India is a deeply religious country. And then there is caste, of course, and we will get into the caste data. But the thing is that in a country like India, where people's primary identification comes from a very specific part of their own background, it is very difficult for them to go out of their way and vote for someone who does not remind them of themselves. But that is just one part of the reality. So the question that one must ask is, why has India, with all its inequality, never birthed a mass socialist leader? Maybe never is too big a word to use. With increasing inequality since liberalization, why has there been no new mass socialist leader that India has had? One thinks of someone like Kanhaiya Kumar, who started out in the student movements, politics, and then moved to the Communist Party, but even he realized that to make something of himself in India, he will have to be part of one of the mainstream parties. And it is a sad reality of India today that none of the Communist parties, barring a few states, are part of the mainstream. So why? Why, amidst so much hunger and hoarding and dispossession and despair, has there been no Indian Hollande, no Lula, no Evo Morales? The answers lie not merely in state violence or elite capture, but deeper, in a people too trained to bow down, too habituated to hierarchy, too reverent of order to rebel against it. India's soil has produced revolutionaries, but they do not rise to power. They are silenced, exiled, imprisoned, or assassinated. And perhaps most damning of all, they are forgotten. One must talk about Umar in this context. One must also talk about Najib in this context. Now, Umar and Najib are two different examples, but it is a glaring, systematic view of India to see what has happened to the two of them and then ask a question, where is India's socialist leader or where is India's Mamdani? Take Father Stan Swami. He did not lead a revolution. He documented its necessity. In Jharkhand, he found not his insurgents but orphans of the republic, young Adivasi men jailed without trial, not for crimes, but for being that. Father took up their cause with the quiet resolve of someone who had looked into the abyss and refused to blink. His 2016 report was not just data, it was a dirge, a census of the criminalization of poverty. And for that, for asking who profits from this brokenness, he was declared a terrorist, arrested under the UAPA, and denied even a straw to drink. He, as we all know, died in custody, untried but unapologetic. But what do we, the public, do with such a martyrdom? We tweet, we mourn, and then we move on. Because to stand with Father Stan is to challenge the edifice of development, of national pride, of corporate extraction, masquerading as economic progress. And most Indians, especially the comfortable, would rather not. Then we have Sudha Bharadwaj. She was born in the US, but she chose India not as nostalgia but as commitment. She traded her mathematics for mining towns and citizenship for solidarity. For decades, she walked shoulder to shoulder with those who never make it to our primetime debates. Contract workers, bonded laborers, Adivasis evicted for dams they'll never benefit from. And for this, for giving them not arms but advocacy, she was branded a conspirator. She too was arrested under UAPA. Her freedom too was traded for fear. Her home exchanged for a surveillance state. Sudha Bharadwaj, like Stan Swami, is dangerous. Not because she wields violence, but because she withholds obedience. And that is what the Indian state cannot tolerate. A compliant citizen may scream on TV, chant slogans, or even riot, but the one who calmly files PILs, who mobilizes unions, who educates the poor to claim their legal rights, that citizen must be caged. But where are we in all this? We, the ones who read of Sudha Bharadwaj's bail conditions and then return to a brunch. We who nod sagely at injustice but dismiss protesters as anti-nationals. We who are complicit, because no authoritarian thrives without the secret endorsement of the silent. Gauri Lankesh refused to be silent. She edited, she argued, she marched and mocked the mighty. She was no ideologue in ivory tower. She was a street fighter with a pen. She did not hide behind objectivity. She declared her allegiance to the secular, the oppressed, and the rational. For this, they shot her at her own doorstep. Not just to kill her, but to terrify others, to remind every woman, every journalist, every dissenting voice, this is your fate if you speak too freely. And yet, the bullets did not only end a life, they indicted a society so numbed by spectacle and noise that it cannot grieve properly, cannot protest meaningfully, cannot sustain memory beyond hashtags. So again, why does India have no socialist leader? Not because there are no visionaries. I just named a few people. They showed us another India, a just, egalitarian, secular India. Not because there is no pressure to resist. From land grabs to caste violence to corporate plunder, the fuel for revolution is everywhere in India. The real reason is much more uncomfortable. It is because we, the people, have internalized obedience. Our democracy is hierarchical. Our dissent is conditional. Our politics is performative. We wait for a savior, but flinch at sacrifice. We admire radicals, but only when they are safely dead or conveniently jailed. We mistake suffering for sainthood and activism for insanity. The Indian state has not merely criminalized resistance, it has cultivated conformity. Through textbooks that exalt obedience, through media that ridicules protest, through a nationalism that worships flags but fears questions. And so the Stan Swamis are jailed, the Sudha Bhardwajas are gagged, and the Gauri Lankeshas are gunned down, while the rest of us scroll past them, whispering that revolution is impractical, un-Indian, impolite. What, what is more impractical? Demanding a fair share or accepting eternal servitude? What is more un-Indian? Fighting for the poor or ignoring them because you made it? And what is more impolite? Raising your voice or staying silent as justice is strangled in broad daylight? India does not lack a socialist leader. It lacks a people willing to follow one. And until we unlearn our worship of power and learn instead to walk with those who are punished for speaking truth, we will remain a nation of orphans. Parentless in morality, leaderless in vision, and increasingly hopeless in silence. So ask yourself, not tomorrow but today, what are we going to fight over? Because in the absence of rebellion, even memory becomes treason. Erich Fromm, in Escape from Freedom, argues that in moments of crisis, human beings often seek comfort not in liberty, but in authority. When they are confronted with anxiety, they do not demand total emancipation. They demand a master, and India is gripped with an uncertain amount of economic anxiety. A lot of our education system rewards rote over reason, and our day-to-day life and interaction with the institutions, for example, our interactions with the police, the judiciary, make us feel that we are powerless. And in societies where the institutions have failed people, where institutions are uh, authoritarian, what we imagine is a person who uh, could come, who is much bigger than any of the institutions, and give us justice. That is also why you will see a lot of the times a lot of privileged folks in India saying India को 20 साल dictator मिल जाए तो India solve हो जाएगा. When they think of a dictator, they do not think of a dictator who's coming not from their community. They are thinking of a dictator who represents their community. An upper caste Hindu uncle is not thinking of Ziaul Haq becoming India's dictator. They are thinking of someone like a Yogi Adityanath becoming India's dictator. And in that case, that dictator will सब कुछ वो ठीक ऐसे करेगा that he will set everyone other than them, this uncle, correct. And so in that case, thinking about someone like a Zohran Mamdani as their representative is a huge leap. Amartya Sen has this interesting concept called adaptive preferences, which is very simply told is our preferences are adapted to our surroundings. If I grow up in India, if I grow up in a Bengali household, and if I like eating mutton curry, it is, as much as I tell myself it is a preference that I enjoy, it is an adaptive preference. Because had I grown up uh, a different North Indian household, which was predominantly vegetarian, I would have probably said that my preference is rajma chawal or something. And a person who um, shares a lot of common traits with me, but prefers rajma chawal as opposed to my mutton curry, feels as strongly about the rajma chawal as I do about my mutton curry, and that is why we fight over biryani and who makes what better, because our adaptive preferences make us feel that there is something that we are actively choosing, which is actively better than anything else, but it is actually part of our of the conditioning that we are formed. And the reason I'm telling you this is because we are also a product of our environment, our media, what our elders talk at home and what is taught to us in school. And if we look at that all around us, we realize that we are meant to respect authority and grow up as compliant individuals who never rebel, and actively choosing someone like a Mamdani. And Mamdani is a very weak example because there are so many stronger examples within India that we could choose from, is not really something that we can even think of as a preference. In 2023, a Lokniti CSDS survey found that 68% of urban millennials in India believe that protests don't change anything. This is not cynicism, or not just cynicism. It is the death of political imagination, surrender of moral agency. In this climate, hope in itself is suspect. The only revolution that you are permitted is a personal revolution. That is, find a job, buy a car, move abroad. Uh, but questioning why a billion people in our country live on less than $3 a day, and the answer that you will get is this is how things are in India. And this is the kind of India that we are coming from. Uh, the reason is that if you look at our homes, our schools, the way the caste system functions around us, even in its invisibility, it dictates us to become that individual. Caste is not simply a social hierarchy, it is a metaphysical order that exists around us in marriage, in meals, in our minds. And this pyramid of caste is infinite. For every Dalit who is denied temple entry, there is a Mahadalit who is is even more oppressed compared to that Dalit individual. There is a phrase that is used a lot in UP politics, more so during the BSP's heyday in power, but still now it's called Ati Pichda. So we are not talking about Pichda Samaj. We are now talking about Ati Pichda. And then and then there are the tribals, the Adivasis. Since 1950, 25 million Adivasis in India have been displaced. They have been collateral for our development goals. They did not authorize it, they were not asked, and they will not benefit from it. And any of their resistance is colored in terms like Naxal and Maoist. These are India, which is anyway in already a not a very educated country. We are talking about the most marginalized of our group and calling them the Maoist. How many of them have read Mao? Even if they have, can we just simply paint all of their resistance as Maoism? Movements like Patalgadi movement in Jharkhand, which sought to assert constitutional autonomy, is dismissed as Maoist rebellion. They are not seen as citizens asserting rights, but as insurgents threatening the state. They are trying to defend their land, their water, and their identity. Caste violence, going back to that, NCRB said on average there are 50,000 caste crimes per year. And yet, any Ambedkarite movement, which actually should be the natural vanguard of any socialist politics in India, is ghettoized as just a Dalit issue. Never allowed to expand into the vocabulary of national class struggle. In India, to suffer is personal and to organize is criminal. A 2023 survey in India, ActionAid, as cited by various different media outlets, revealed that 78% of Indian urban youth could not name a single tribal rights activist in India. This is not a gap in general knowledge, it is the outcome of institutional design. We are fighting over Maratha battle dates, but not the role of tribal resistance in shaping modern India. Of course, Nehruvian socialism has been edited out of our textbooks. Ambedkarite ideas have been neutered into just talking about constitution and framing that as one of the pantheons of many different gods that we worship. But any radical voice, any radical idea is not even being presented to our people. And the reason is simple. The reason is that we want to sustain an authoritarian society. Between 2014 to 2022, sedition charges increased by 399% in India. And these overwhelmingly targeted the same communities that have historically challenged the system: Dalits, Adivasis, Muslims, trade unionists. The law is wielded not against lawbreakers, but any truth teller. For example, talking about Mamdani, Sudha Bharadwaj, a lawyer who spent decades defending workers and tribals in India, was imprisoned under UAPA for her associations. Her real crime was organizing the poor into people with voices, and in India, that is a crime the state does not forgive. India does not lack potential leaders. It simply ensures they never get the microphone. Those who speak of redistribution are called Maoist. Those who stand with the dispossessed are accused of conspiracy. Those who ask for equality are told they are breaking the nation. And all the while, the structure remains intact. A structure where 57% of our parliamentarians are millionaires, while 60% of Indians live on less than rupees 150 a day. Where corporate bailouts are easy, but farmer suicides are a statistic. Where media houses are owned by billionaires, and courts are quiet when asked to speak for the voiceless. We live in a system of elite capture, which is masquerading as electoral ritual. India's socialist vacuum is not an accident. It is where the state represses, society obeys, history forgets, and the poor, atomized by caste, anesthetized by charity, and pathologized by propaganda, are never allowed to see themselves as a class. If we are ever to have a socialist leader, it will not begin with an election. It will begin with a rupture of memory, of hierarchy, of silence. And until then, India remains a land rich in martyrs, poor in movements, a land where obedience is patriotic, poverty is a personal failure, and rebellion is still a four-letter word.